The Environmental Protection Agency details its Chesapeake Bay cleanup plan. But can localities afford it? This is what matters. Good evening, I'm Kathy Lewis. The EPA wants to put the Chesapeake Bay on a diet, but some localities say they can't afford it. The Bay diet is a victory for some environmental groups who've had long concerns about the Bay, but some local communities say it's just another unfunded mandate. Joining us to review the plan and the costs, Christy Everett, who's the Hampton Roads Director with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Corey Nealon is the environmental reporter with the Daily Press. York County Administrator James McReynolds joins us, as well as Bruce Goodson, who's the Vice Chair of the James City County Board of Supervisors. Thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. I appreciate it. But, you know, every time we see these stories about Bay cleanup plans, it's always controversial. Corey, you've been covering this, and I think it's very tough to get a plan that covers multiple jurisdictions, in fact, multiple states.
Yeah, I mean, it's an effort that federal government and the states have been working on since the early 80s. And
this was it surprising to you that they managed to do this? I mean, I was reading some research that seemed to indicate that it was really surprising that they came up with what they did at the end of the day. Well,
you know, they've been working on this particular plan since, well, I think since President Obama issued an executive order in May of 2008, I believe it was. That sound right?
So what are the highlights on that? So what are the highlights on it?
Well, essentially, he wanted to accelerate the Bay cleanup. It's something that they've been working on forever, but the progress has been limited. And he directed the EPA to have states come up with their own plans to limit the amount of phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment being discharged into the bay. So you've been working on this for a long time too, Christy Everett with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. What's your organization's take on what they came up with?
Well, as Corey mentioned, the first Chesapeake Bay Agreement that identifies too much nutrient pollution coming into the bay was in 1983. So we've been talking about this for decades. We know exactly what the problem is. In year 2000, we had the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, and they said, for 10 years, let's try and see if we can do this voluntarily. And then, of course, since 1998, EPA had responsibility under a lawsuit to make the bay fishable and swimmable. It's still not there by 2010, so their responsibility was to say, it's time to go on a diet bay.
Yeah. And so they essentially said, or your concern was, who's going to do this, right? I mean, is this a state issue? Is it a federal issue?
Well, yeah, and you made a good point too a moment ago that the bay is a 64,000 square mile watershed, so you can't just do it state by state. You really have to have some overarching authority like the EPA to say, let's look at loads from all states and how can we make this bay fishable and swimmable. It doesn't just stop at the border. It really has to be done in a coordinated effort.
It's an interesting point. And so this term TMDL comes up.
Total maximum daily load. And so really it is like a diet for the bay. How much pollution can a water body sustain and still be able to provide fishing and swimming safely for the citizens of the watershed?
And so we're talking about phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediments.
Exactly.
Right. And so we've got some pictures of this that are very, I think, compelling, so we'll put some of those up, but they have to do with what are called algal blooms, and these are, well, you tell us what they are.
Exactly. So too much nitrogen and phosphorus is actually a bad thing for the bay. We have 17 million people in the watershed, about 150,000 people moving in each year. So the bay has almost too much of a good thing. It's being loved to death.
So these lighter sections that we're seeing now, this is the algal bloom.
Right. Each summer when the water's warm, we have a lot of nutrient runoff off the land because rain carries off too much sediment and too much nitrogen and phosphorus pollution. It blooms. Underwater grasses that are in our water and important for habitat, provide oxygen, important hiding places for crabs and other critters, can't get enough light to survive. And then when these algal blooms die off, you have these dead zones, areas devoid of oxygen. Actually, in some areas, you will see crabs crawling up to the shoreline because they can't get enough oxygen to breathe. So it really is a problem. You can never restore the bay until you stop these algal blooms, and you can't stop those until you reduce the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus pollution.
So we're talking about 12 localities localities, something like $9.5 billion, Corey, something like that?
Yeah, that's the latest estimate from the state.
I mean, that's an amazing amount of money. Mac McReynolds, York County Administrator, you're the city or the county executive who has the responsibility of managing the money there. What will the impact of this be in York County? Have you had a chance to calculate that?
Yes, we have. And if you were to go with the first estimates we had at $9.8 billion, it would be about a 71% increase in York County's real estate taxes. We'd go from a rate of about 65.75 cents to $1.12. So it'd be a significant impact. And
my guess is you might hear from one or two citizens.
I imagine we would. We already have, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. So did you say that's the latest estimate? Or
no, that was the initial estimate.
Yeah.
Now, the latest estimate is down to about $2.5 billion, and that would be only 21% increase, or about 12 cents on the 65.75. So.
You know, I know that localities are stressed. Is this sort of a stand-in-line deal, one more thing that's been ordered by somebody else but not funded?
It is indeed an unfunded mandate, yes. And there are, as I understand it, some bills in Congress that would potentially help, but waiting on a check from Washington these days is not something we're going to be planning on. You're
not going to be standing by the mailbox, I see. Bruce Goodson is the James City County Board of Supervisors Vice Chair, so you're the elected authority around this. What are you hearing from your constituents?
Well, we're hearing a real concern about the cost, but my concern is that we appropriately bring the responsibility around who it belongs to. I mean, if you look at the original EPA backstops, they only reflected a oversight of 1% in the agricultural community, and clearly 40 to 50% of the problem of the phosphorus and what's going into the bay is coming from agriculture. And so the Virginia plan tries to address that to 40%, but there's really no regulation yet for that. And so farms are going to have some type of buffering or some type of facilities to filter runoff from the farms. And so it's a concern of mine that what's going to happen is they're going to look to the localities where we've got money, we've got the ability to tax our local citizens and offer us opportunities to trade, to take our citizens and pay off farmers, and so that we don't have to have so much of an expense or much of the retrofits in the localities. We're looking at retrofitting so that we're filtering 25% of the land mass in the urban communities. That is these high efficiency BMPs, basically BMPs, which are the best management practices. Okay. As people go around, they see these pools of water where what happens is the storm water goes into these pools, and then what the BPA and the Virginia plan would have us is to put these facilities in that would filter the runoff. You know, you got to look at other solutions too that might possibly be less expensive. Maybe regulating fertilizer. You know, if we didn't put fertilizer on the land, then it wouldn't have to go into the BMPs to be filtered in the first place. It looks like we go to the easy solutions. The easy solutions are force local governments to filter instead of going back to the real source of the problem, which is of the phosphates, phosphates, and the fertilizers that are going in the land and the farms.
And so, Corey Nealon, what does your reporting tell you? Because I'm guessing when Bruce Goodson says this about, hey, you know, the farms are responsible for most of this, but it's not the farms who are being asked to pick up the tab here. What does your reporting tell you about how they're reacting?
Well, it seems like nobody really wants to pick up the tab. I mean,
there's a shock.
It's a lot of money, you know. I believe, you know, the Farm Bureau has put out some figures that I think it was something like $800 million for the cost of cattle fence streaming. The Hampton Roads Planning District Commission put out a figure of $680 million per year, which was a worst case scenario, and they said that. And you know, it's something that's going to cost money for sure. And I think this year the states are going to be working with the localities to really kind of nail down the plans on individual basis and get a better idea of what exactly is going to be done. And then you're going to get to see those costs and really see how much it's going to affect your localities.
Mac, how much farmland do you have in York County, and do you agree with this perspective? Very
little. We have, I think, less than 3% of our total budget's agriculture.
But it's an interesting point about where government authorities are able to go. We talk about this captive audience business, you know, where they're able to go to get the funding for these kinds of things. Christy Everett, what does your organization like about this plan? And are you concerned? I mean, we're talking about a large responsibility for this being among farmers. Do you buy that?
Well, I think we've got a good point here, too, that there are some no-cost options. And, for example, a lot of bills in this General Assembly session on reducing phosphorus coming from fertilizer. I think 9 bills, which is almost a record. And so, for example, homeowners put phosphorus on their lawns when they don't need it. They only need it for establishing lawns, not necessarily maintaining it. Virginia Tech estimates 4.5 million pounds of nitrogen come into the bay each year from fertilizer. You can put slow-release nitrogen, which is proposed in one of the bills this General Assembly session, in a lawn care package. Sell that, work with Home Depot, sell that in the store, and then reduce that fertilizer coming into our waterways without costing localities anything. I do think we all are going to have to do our part. We can't just point to other people. We've worked hard to try to get from the federal government funding for this, but I don't think we can count on it these days. I do think we need to think about the economic value of the bay, though, and that it really is an investment. If we keep looking the other way, we're going to keep paying for it.
So when you talk about the economic value of the bay, I think a lot of people think fishing would be a big one.
Fishing's a great example. In 2004, Virginia Institute of Marine Science estimated that commercial and recreational fishing, just in that year alone, generated $1.23 billion in sales, $717 million in revenue, and 13,000 jobs. But you can also look at tourism. Do people want to come to beaches that are closed because of high bacteria levels? Are watermen going to be able to grow out oysters or clams, which is a $77 million industry in Virginia, if water's too dirty, and they'll have to purge them in clean water before they sell them? So there's a lot of numbers out there to show that tourism, property values, of course, recreational fishing, all that pays Virginia back.
You mentioned watermen, and I couldn't help remembering, I just had the opportunity to see this marvelous photography exhibit at the Mariners Museum about the life of the watermen. If you have not seen it, Glenn McClure's brilliant photographer did this. That is an amazing photography exhibit because you really get a sense, if you've seen it, you really get a sense of how tough this life is. And then when you look at those algal blooms and what's happening in the longer term, you have a sense of what challenges are there that need to be met. So, Mac McReynolds, as you look at this bill, I'm guessing you're not opposed to cleaning up the bay. I feel confident about that.
Absolutely.
That's the biggest softball I could give you, my friend.
Thank you.
But what do we do about this? I mean, and I know that you're responsible at the county level for the distribution of assets and resources, but does Christie have a point here? Is this something that you could communicate to individuals and make an impact in?
Oh, I think so. There's definitely things we can do. There's another part of the plan, the nutrient mitigation, that is doing things such as putting together a land management plan, or a fertilizer plan, if you will, that talks about using the low phosphates, when you're going to apply, how you're going to apply fertilize. And if you'll put that together regionally or for your locality, you can get some credit toward the capital that you would have to invest in these BMPs that Bruce was talking about. So there's these sorts of things that can be done across the board that will help lower the cost. And that's still being defined, however, and it's a moving target. So, but there are, so
that would help if you could just get settled on the cost of this thing, I guess. What are your colleagues telling you across the bay? I just think the response is so interesting. We call it a watershed. It's a multi-state area, and yet in some of the responses, you hear representatives in one state saying, "Hey, it's not us. We shouldn't have to pay for it. You all do it."
Now, we're hearing uniformly that this is a worthy goal. It's something we need to do, but let's not try to do it in 14 years if we don't have to, because it didn't happen in 14 years. So let's do it, but let's do it in a reasonable way at a reasonable pace.
As you think about this, Bruce Goodson, how do you think we ought to roll this out? I mean, is it too much too soon?
That's a good point that Mac McReynolds just mentioned, because it took us 150 years to get to this point to try to solve it in 14. It could be way too aggressive. You got to think about how the region, right now we've got economic issues in this country and in the region, and we want to remain competitive. And if our tax rates or our environmental regulations are to a point that it makes us uncompetitive, then business will go to other areas of the country where it's not so much, and the whole region will suffer, and then we will have less resources to solve these problems. If we tackle these issues steady, but not as aggressive, not too aggressively, then maybe we can have a good balance and still remain competitive and take care of these issues that we all understand that need to be done.
Time frame wise, would that work?
Well, as I said before, we've been working at this for decades. We have the best restoration science in the world. All the top scientists mention that. But, you know, we've been talking about that since 1999. We had 10 years of voluntary planning. So 15 years to me doesn't seem rushed. And in terms of jobs, if you look at the Lynnhaven River, the city, the community, Lynnhaven River Now, citizens came together and they said, let's clean up our waterways. In 8 years, they opened up a third of the river. They now have 6 aquaculture operations working out of that river, making money. Tourists are coming to eat the famous Lynnhaven River that hasn't been there for decades. They're selling them to Las Vegas, to New York. It's a burgeoning industry. It means jobs, and it means quality of life.
And Corey Nealon, Congressman Rob Whitman in the 1st District has introduced a bill called the Chesapeake Bay Accountability and Recovery Act of 2011. And he's really concerned about how these resources are distributed.
Right. I mean, it's an effort the congressman, I think he first introduced that in 2009, and he eventually, well, won House support for it, but it never went anywhere in the Senate. And essentially, the bill would just track federal and state spending on bay restoration. It's something that a lot of people complain about. They don't know where the money's going. They don't track it well.
There's this other post that you've made about mercury pollution from power plants. What's the story there?
Well, power plants, I mean, there's mercury pollution from a lot of places, but power plants are one of your most significant sources. It's, you know, it comes from the air and it gets down into the water. Sometimes it just gets onto the land and then it filters into the water from rain. And you've seen it play out with the proposal to build that power plant over in Surrey County. I mean, that was one of the big issues, mercury pollution from that. And I think it played a significant role in sort of in batting back that effort to build that plant. I mean, it's still on hold and it might be built, but for the time being, it's, you know, it's put on the shelf.
So, you know, as we think about this effort to clean up the bay, does Christie have a point here that we've been at this for a long time? So.
And we have been working with it for a long time. I mean, we've done retrofitting of our Hampton Road sanitation facilities, and the bay is improving, I understand. Even it's not, I don't think we're going backwards anymore. But back to the federal issue, this is an interstate commerce issue. Much of the TMDL, daily loads, that's coming to the Chesapeake Bay is coming from Pennsylvania, it's coming from Maryland.
And they're saying, not us.
They have to share some of this responsibility. In fact, we're at the bottom end of it. And so, you know, we've got to have some federal help. You know, there's federal regulation coming down from it, but we've got to have federal acknowledgement that the cost has to be shared. And then the country as a whole is benefiting from the commerce that's coming from our area and from the agriculture that's coming from our area. Then they should share in the cost of this and not put it on the localities in Hampton Roads because there's federal regulation on us because of the MS4. The federal government, we have to have a permitting for our stormwater, which is called a MS4, and that's how the EPA can regulate local government as opposed to not being able to regulate agriculture.
Yeah, you know, I think this is so interesting, Bruce, because you really have, if you're going to run for local elective office, it's amazing what you have to develop an expertise in. I mean, you know, you know about this and you know about other issues as well. And it's complex, isn't it? I mean, when you talk about the environment and the federal government plans, it can be complex.
And it's important that we deal with this as a region. Yeah. And the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, which I'm serving on, all the localities have representation on that, has decided to come up with a framework that we're all going to determine if the information that is coming from the state and from the federal government is correct, and we're going to do an assessment of that, and then feed this information in as a regional basis, and so we can have discussion as a region rather than the 16 localities, each of us doing that
Mac,
separately.
what's the impact of that on the kind of work that you do, this idea of approaching things from a regional perspective, particularly on something that really does affect the entire region?
Oh, it's tremendous help. When we work together, we can get a whole lot more done. And in this case, I think it's extremely important because of the dollars that are at play here. If one locality tried to take this on individually, we just couldn't do it.
And you said you're waiting to have sort of a final bill for you to know what the total cost of this approach is going to be. I mean, these dollar figures that get thrown around are so astounding. How could you have that? I mean, how could they have that much difference between the initial estimates and the final estimates?
Well, I think that, as Mr. Goodson indicated earlier, that Hampton Roads Plan District Commission, excuse me, took the worst case scenario at first, and that was before the state had submitted their plan. It had been accepted by EPA. So as we looked at what was the worst case, as that's moved over time, and hopefully it's going to continue to move as we look at the way to mitigate this. That's, I think, how it was so diverse.
As we think, Christy, I want to go back to the points that you were making about this idea that individual citizens can have it, because I think a lot of times we forget about that. We think about farmers, we think about big industries that generate some level of pollution. I don't know that we always think about our own role in that. As you think about your work at the Bay, you've talked about this idea of phosphorus and making sure that what you put on your lawn is really needed on your lawn.
Well, I think one important point, too, is that people just don't want the quote-unquote bay clean. They want the river or the creek in their backyard clean. So I think we need to remember that we can say it's someone else's fault, but until we have clean local waters, until we keep seeing algal blooms year after year, there's something wrong. I mean, we've lost, watermen that used to be in our communities. And VIMS did a report in 1994 to 2004, 30% of commercial fishing was lost. Between Maryland and Virginia, that's $640 million loss in revenue. So I think it's important to think about the implication. People can do a lot to improve and prevent pollution, but in general, I think we just need to make people know and help support our elected officials. I think city government, localities get a lot of pressure to reduce taxes, and I don't think they're communicating back to you how important our waterways are to our economy, to our culture, to our quality of life, and that's why a lot of us moved to Hampton Roads, because of all the waterways we have, and clean waterways to boot.
Bruce Goodson, I wonder, as you talk to your constituents, and at the end of the day, Mac is an appointed official who doesn't have to face the voters. You do. When you talk to your constituents about the different competing interests for their tax dollars, what are they telling you about where this effort fits in the scheme of things?
This effort is fitting because it seems to be forced upon us, and a lot of folks see that. I mean, there's a lot of appreciation with the electorate for bay restoration and bay cleanup, but what the citizens see right now are these huge numbers. And so that's what.
And they know who's going to pay for it in the end.
That's where the issue is. Everybody wants to clean up the bay, but then when they see these huge numbers, they get really. But the main thing they want to make sure of is if we're doing it responsibly, and we're doing it as most economically and responsibly as we can, and that any new facilities we put in are going to be the type of facilities that are going to be the best ones going forward. It's going to be the type of facilities. When I say facilities, these are BMPs or stormwater facilities that are going to take care of things in the future. They don't want to see their tax money wasted. In fact, we had a stormwater referendum in James City County that did not pass after some headlines in the paper about these costs, because the citizen wanted to make sure that what the improvements we were making in stormwater in James City County also made improvements for bay cleanup as well. And so we wanted to take a step back, see how these regulations were going to come before us, and then we were going to move forward. So we're going to do it responsibly. That's what's important.
Yeah. Christy Everett, what's the next step on this?
I think really look to see how in 2011 the first milestone is up, so see how the state's doing their watershed implementation plan with localities, obviously arm in arm. So they're going to the localities and saying this is how we can do this together. But there'll be every 2 years there'll be a check-in, and I think that's different from what we had before. And if there isn't the leadership taken or kind of the promises met that they said in their watershed implementation plan, then EPA really needs to help guide that. But hopefully the states will do what they said in their plan, and we'll see that progress every few years until 2015. All right. 2025, excuse me.
Too fast, not fast enough, Mac? What do you think?
Well,
too fast.
I think that given the magnitude of the cost and the impact it's going to have on a potential impact it's going to have on the individual households, it may be too aggressive.
Yeah.
Again,
because in your county you're talking about 20-some% increase in
21% based on the latest numbers that we have. So, and that's anywhere from, that's something on the order of I believe, about $800 per household.
I'm thinking about York County and James City County, or if you look in the scheme of things, better off than some other counties in some other cities in the region. So, I mean, you could have some pretty tough consequences here.
Well, we have a lot of land mass, and it's all based on the compact cities. We actually have less land mass to worry about.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, we're larger, so we're going to have so it doesn't take into account the population. You have a higher population to support the cleanup as opposed to area. We have less population, more land mass. So really, we're probably
you're on the worst end of it. Yeah.
Actually, York County is per capita, per household, the worst.
Yeah.
We have the highest cost.
Yeah.
So.
Good times. Well, good luck to you all. So we'll keep an eye on this, and I'm sure, Corey, you'll be continuing to report on this in the pages of the Daily Press. So we will continue to keep an eye on this one as well, and sort of see where we strike this balance between what the Bay needs and what the citizens can afford. It's a story we're hearing repeated over and over in a variety of issues. So we'll see where we go on this. Corey Nealon, thank you for being with us. Bruce Goodson, thank you for running for office and for serving, by the way. I always like to thank elected officials because it is sometimes a thankless job, so thank you for doing that. Mac McReynolds, I'm glad to see you again, and thank you for being here. And Christy Everett from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, thank you for being here as well. It's cbf.org if you want more information about some of the cleanup initiatives and some of the strategies that you can use as an individual to do your part to clean up the Bay, which is such a treasure. Well, I'm sure you heard something in this broadcast that you agree with or disagree with. So if you head on over to our website, that's whatmatters.tv. You can send us an email as well at whatmatters@whro.org. On the radio for more local talk, I hope you'll join us for Hearsay. That's on 89.5 WHRV FM. And we are live each weekday there at noon, and we'll be glad to take your calls. Thanks again for watching. I'm Kathy Lewis, and we'll see you next time for another look at what matters.